Welcome to the Cryptid Council. It's Larson Edson. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Today's video is going to be asking the simple question: do humanoid cryptids hunt, kill, and or eat people? Let's get into it. This video was inspired by an individual and a channel which I generally really enjoy and respect. And as you're about to see, we do have a disagreement on this topic. However, I'm not trying to throw shade here, so please keep that in mind. I'm just talking about a topic that I find to be highly relevant, and it's one which I believe Vic Cundiff of Dogman Encounters gets wrong. Anyone who has listened to or watched Dogman Encounters for any extended period of time has likely heard Vic Cundiff say his somewhat signature line, which is, "If it wanted to get you, it probably would have." He usually precedes or follows this up by saying something to the effect that dogmen are generally not dangerous, that they don't really hunt people, and that you have to remember that when you're encountering them, and that you're probably safe, and that if it had wanted to get you, it would have done it, and it would have done it easily. Things like this are very common for Vic Cundiff of Dogman Encounters to say. Once again, I want to reiterate and emphasize that I really enjoy this channel. I think he does a lot of good work. He's very enigmatic and mysterious, and I don't know much about the individual himself, but I've enjoyed his channel for a long time. So let's dive into 3 reasons that I think this is the wrong take when asking questions about these werebeasts, humanoids, and these kind of upright, semi-human seeming entities, which are addressed in another video that I will link down below, which speaks more about their origins and perhaps some of their nature. And like I said, I think I already tipped my hand. The answer to this is yes. I do believe that these beasts are highly dangerous, and I do believe that, at least in a significant amount of situations, they will hunt, terrorize, hurt, and perhaps abduct and or eat humans. So let's get into why. There are really 3 possibilities when it comes to thinking about and categorizing these beasts. Either they are literally, as I just said, beasts. And by that I mean they're animals. They're animalistic, and in that sense, they would, of course, be dangerous in the same sense that a grizzly bear or a shark would be. Now, similar to grizzly bears or sharks, if we're good to go with category number 1, which is that they're animals, we could say that they're potentially not always dangerous. And on top of that, they're potentially not specifically bad or evil in a dangerous sense. They're just animals. But what that does mean is that if they're hungry, or if they're injured, or if they perceive you as a threat, or if you stumble upon their family in a way that they find to be threatening, they can and will hurt or kill you. This also would lead to the idea that just like animals, they are, of course, thinking beings. So some of them are going to be more prone to be kind and gentle. Others are going to be more prone to violence. And there's no real way of predicting that. Now, how does this change between species? How does this change between families or clans? We don't know. But this is really category number 1. And as you see, in category number 1, the answer is yes, they're dangerous, and at least on occasion, they will hunt, hurt, or kill you. Category number 2 is one that really seems to most apply to something like a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot, but also could be said to apply to a dogman or a Googway. And that is the idea that they're essentially a type of humans. Now, many encounters and many eyewitnesses do say this. Most people don't. Most tend to say that they think they're some kind of flesh and blood beast or animal, in my experience at least. However, there are people in a repeating sense that is perhaps in the minority, but is still very much present, who claim that these things are, to them, very much human. Now, whether that's a shape-shifting human, or whether that's a human who has, been the descendant of some people who lived in the woods for the last several hundred years, or whether that's an offshoot from the human tree of development, or anything like that. These are claims that people will make. I don't put much stock in them personally, but it's a possibility, so we're going to address it. Now, that is one potential element, and that's going to be our group number 2, which is that they're essentially a type of human. Now, again, we run into the problem that we basically did with beasts, which is that in this case, some of them would be perhaps more gentle or more prone to simply desire solitude, and others would be more aggressive. And some among them may potentially be downright psychotic, evil, and bent towards wanting to cause as much destruction as possible. The twist in this category is that they'd be even more intelligent if they are indeed at their core human. And with intelligence comes a heightened ability for creative and destructive evil. So category 1, we'd see that yes, they would be dangerous in multiple ways, which I listed. Category 2 would be similar, but arguably worse. Then we get to category 3. And as you'll see here, we're kind of on a downward trajectory. We're going downhill as far as how bad this is. And category 3 would indeed be the worst. And that is the idea that these are some kind of dark entity. They are a demonic entity, perhaps in origin. This is the one that I tend to believe and I think holds the most water. Again, if you want to see why, you can visit my video down below. Spoiler alert, I tend to think that these are something of a mix of categories 1 and categories 3. Again, fully addressed in a video that's linked. Now, if these are something like a mix between this, the wolf on screen, and something dark like this, which, as we are told in many different ancient texts and ancient accounts, is basically exactly the unanimous decision that the ancients held about many different humanoid or werebeasts. Well, in that case, I think we would have excessive reason to be very cautious around these things. I think that not only would they be even smarter than humans, not only would they be even stronger and faster than beasts, but they would be even more likely to have a bend towards evil and destruction. And if you look at accounts of some of these werebeasts and humanoids, I think that that tends to be the general truth and the consistent binding thread. Now, every now and then you do have an account of a really nice or altruistic one that helps a kid. In my experience, again, those tend to be the more rare. And not only that, but those tend to be explainable if we do combine them with category 1, which is beasts. So if these are in origin dark entities that had some kind of relations with beasts, well, it is plausible that some of them, through simple just genetics and breeding, would be more towards the animalistic, the beast side. And as we know, some animals are kind of nice. Now, the general rule is that they're dangerous, which I think is indeed the general rule, whether you're looking at Bigfoot, Googway, Loot Guru, Dogman, Yaren, Yeti, Rock Ape, or you name it. So basically, I think that no matter what group we go to out of these 3, we have significant reason just through logic. And if we combine that logic with our observed alleged encounters of people, and I only say alleged not because I'm trying to be a jerk to anyone who claims to have had an encounter, simply because I've never had a first-hand encounter myself, so I don't want to present myself as having that experience. Rather, I'll just say these alleged encounters that I happen to think tend to be real. Well, what we see is that they do tend to be fairly aggressive, fairly dangerous, quite often somewhat cruel or intending harm, or at least intending to cause panic in humans. And I'd say the much, much, much more rare instance is that one is specifically kind or nice. With that in mind, let's dive into a quick section where I'm going to back this up with some history. If we look at the North American Sasquatch legends, we see that the Paiute legends, something that is called, and forgive me if I butcher this, the Si-Tech-Cha. And this is red hand giants who are cannibals who abduct and eat people while living in caves and in the woods. We also see that the Nani are hairy giants of California, who tribes said would kidnap women and children, never to be seen again. Similarly, with the Australian Yowie, we see that the indigenous beliefs say that the Yowies would somewhat coexist with their tribes, but also would attack on occasion and would carry people off. In China, something that today might be generalized as the Yaren was called the Yizo Shu, and this was a baboon-like being that ate people. We also see Zhu, ape men, which allegedly lacked females, oddly enough, and abducted women to breed. Vietnamese rock apes are said to know to abduct people, never to be seen again. Whether this is for breeding or eating, we don't really know. The African dodo is said to be aggressive specifically to humans and gorillas who it will fight on sight. These fights are said to be to the death. The Indian Yeti is said to be highly territorial. The Yeti seems to be viewed as something as a representation of a guard or a sentry of their territory, both the indigenous people of the Himalayas territory, but also, of course, of the Yeti's own territory, and it's known for attacking intruders. I would guess that this is something that is indeed the nature of this specific type of beast, but is rather interpreted by indigenous individuals as perhaps being representative of how they feel about their own land. It protects and seeks to preserve its home, and I think that they probably relate to it, and thus they would attribute to it some elements that they respected and admired, but also feared. The Gugwe, more simply known as face eaters, are known to decapitate and eat victims in their legend, also abducting people. The Choctaw Champee of North America is similar and arguably the same beast but different name to the Gugwe, and is known to abduct women. The North American dogman or loup-garou are something of a very difficult topic to address, and I will have more videos on them later. However, if, again, you've listened to Vic Cundiff's channel, you'll know that there are certainly examples where one was chasing an individual who was only saved because they had either a vehicle or a firearm, where one was trying outright to stop vehicles, where one was seeking to terrorize and cause panic in humans. And in Cajun legend, the loup-garou, which I believe seems to be in my studies probably synonymous with the dogman, is said to indeed eat individuals. These are also said to terrorize local tribes. And then we have the European dogman legend, which is pretty much the same exact thing. It's believed in medieval folklore to be absolutely savage and to devour both beasts and humans. With these ideas in mind, if we're going to consider these humanoid cryptids, I think that it might be a bit of a stretch to say that what Vic Cundiff offers as his general answer is the whole truth. I think the actual truth might be something a little bit more nuanced, but certainly bent more towards the caution danger side. A few final notes on this topic. One is that there is an absolutely excellent set of videos by what I believe is a First Nations content creator who responds to absolute nonsense from a creator named Trey the Explainer, who sets out to quote unquote debunk the myth of the native Sasquatch. And what Trey the Explainer does, which he does in many of his videos on various topics, is he really cherry picks his way through history and specifically through First Nations accounts about hairy men of the forest and Sasquatch or wild men. They go by many different names in both European and First Nations cultures. The First Nations content creator, which will be linked down below, does an excellent job of responding to what is frankly dishonest propaganda from Trey the Explainer. And if you look at his videos, you will see some excellent historical accounts, many of which include significant danger and threat. I'll probably do another video specifically talking about First Nations accounts of hairy men of the forest and hairy giants and Sasquatch and things like this, but an excellent place to start is going to be in those videos that will be in the description. Another note I want to focus in on is the reality that whether or not you find these humanoid creatures to be reliably dangerous to and hunting humans, what seems to be widely accepted about these creatures across various different cultures, various different continents, and time frames is that they absolutely hate, will absolutely hunt, kill, and potentially eat canines or dogs. And if you're anything like me and you love your dogs, that alone is enough for you to have serious caution and serious consideration about how you're prepared to defend yourself and your family. For me, I count my dogs as part of the family. And it's also enough reason for you to view them very skeptically and to frankly heighten your security as best you can when you're in a region that you think they might dwell in, or if you're out squatching or something like that in the forest. I really think that protecting your dogs, to me, is part of protecting your family. And it also tells us a lot about these creatures, if indeed they do exist, which I believe they do, that they absolutely disdain and will kill your dogs. Dogs represent several things throughout the centuries of humankind, and one of them is security, another is companionship, and something else is this kind of idea of two species working together and being willing to and able to kind of set aside their differences and press forward for the best of both species, that being humans and dogs. And that's why they're called man's best friend. They help us hunt, they keep us warm, they protect our families from humans and other threats. They also help us to be alerted to things that our own senses could not pick up on because they have better hearing, better scent, and better eyesight than we do, especially in the dark. And I think that all of these might play into exactly why these werebeasts or humanoids hate dogs and why they seek to eliminate them anytime that they are around a family or a human that is in the vicinity of one of these beasts. Lastly, just a practical note that I have never seen Vic Cundiff or many of the other proponents who say that these beasts aren't that dangerous or, aren't so likely to kill you because most people survive their encounters. I've never seen those individuals address what I'm about to say. And it's a super simple, realistic point. The point is just this, that those who did not survive their encounters, whether they were abducted or killed and or eaten, are not going to be around to tell you that they didn't survive their encounters. People go missing around the world all the time, in rural areas and in the US in national and state parks. This happens literally every week in the US alone. And many of those cases are never solved, and the bodies or the individuals alive are never found. Again, this is just a simple truth that I want to make crystal clear. The people who suffered the fate that we're talking about here, that is potentially something that we need to be mindful of, wouldn't be around to share their account of how that fate happened with you. So if these humanoid werebeasts are highly intelligent and capable animals, or something even smarter and more dangerous, it's perfectly realistic to look at many of the deaths and disappearances and say, well, at least some of those are probably worth attributing to these beings. Assuming they exist and have even some of the capabilities that witnesses have claimed, I think that that's only fair. Alright, that's it for today, guys. That is my case for why I respectfully disagree with Vic Cundiff of Dogman Encounters Radio and the other people who tend to preach that Sasquatch and Dogman and some of these other entities that are humanoids are something like peaceful guardians of the forest or beings that you don't need to fear. I simply don't agree with it. But let me know your thoughts down below. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.